As a kid, all a nigga wanna have was a Burberry scarf and $3 in my pocket. Instead I got beat with a switch, but I don't give a fuck, but it's on my body. Scars all up on me, but I run around from everybody. Life lesson learned, I better learn from this bitch, nobody. She pushed me around, she didn't give no motherfucks about it. She broke my heart 3 times, but I ain't getting...
There is a problem with Mike Tomlin and the Pittsburgh Steelers that has existed for the last 8 to 9 years that nobody has talked about. Now, hear me out. With me getting ready to criticize Mike Tomlin, I understand that this video is going to get a lot of hate and it is going to generate a lot of backlash. Because anytime you just give Mike Tomlin just a little dab of criticism, a lot of Steeler fans come to his defense and they never want to blame him for any of the Steelers' problems. They always want to say, well, JT, Mike Tomlin wasn't the reason why the Steelers turned the football over and lost the game. Mike Tomlin has never had a losing season. Mike Tomlin is one of the best coaches in the NFL. Mike Tomlin is going to be a future Hall of Famer. I understand these things, okay? But people act like Mike Tomlin is never to blame for the Pittsburgh Steelers' problems. And it really irritates me, okay? Because here's the thing. Let me ask you a question, and I want you guys to raise your hand if you agree. Raise your hand if you consider Mike Tomlin to be one of the best head coaches in the NFL. Raise your hand if you consider Mike Tomlin to be an elite head coach along with guys like Bill Belichick and Andy Reid. Do you mention Mike Tomlin in that same conversation as those other coaches that I just mentioned? Raise your hand if you do. Now, if you raise your hand to any of those questions, let's compare Mike Tomlin to his counterparts. Let's compare Mike Tomlin to Bill Belichick. So we know what Bill Belichick has done this past decade with the New England Patriots. The New England Patriots have been a model of what a dynasty is and how an organization should be built and how a franchise should be ran. Not only just in the NFL, but in sports. But ask yourself this. Why has Bill Belichick accomplished more this past decade with the New England Patriots than Mike Tomlin? Ask yourself that. And don't blame it on the New England Patriots having a better team, because the Steelers have always had better teams for the New England Patriots ever since 2013. The Steelers have had some of the best Steeler teams ever assembled in franchise history. Okay? So ask yourself, why are the Patriots so successful compared to the Pittsburgh Steelers? Why has Bill Belichick had more success than Mike Tomlin over the past decade? Well, I think the biggest reason for this is because the New England Patriots have a better structure than Pittsburgh. You see, Mike Tomlin is a great coach. He is a player's coach. He is a guy who players go to war for. And he is a coach that allows players to be themselves and allows players to express themselves, just like Pete Carroll with Seattle. That's what makes Pete Carroll and Mike Tomlin such great coaches, because they get the most out of their players. That's why Pete Carroll was so great at USC. That's why Pete Carroll is still so great with Seattle. Okay, that's why Mike Tomlin has been so great with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But with allowing players to express themselves and allowing players a little bit more freedom and not really having that much of a strong, strict structure, you allow players to speak their minds and allow them to be themselves, and that causes problems in the locker room. That's how you get guys like Antonio Brown. That's how you got Ben Roethlisberger, who has been well known for being a diva. And it's come to a point that I remember in the past there have been fallouts with former Pittsburgh Steelers players such as Troy Polamalu. And I remember reading an article earlier in the offseason that Troy Polamalu does not really have a great relationship with Mike Tomlin with the handling of how his last year in Pittsburgh went, and Pittsburgh ultimately forcing him to retire. And it's like Mike Tomlin chose the side of his quarterback in Ben Roethlisberger and didn't hold Ben Roethlisberger accountable to the level that he was holding everybody else. Same thing with Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown was allowed freedom. He took advantage of it, and that's how Antonio Brown managed to get out of Pittsburgh. It came to the point that Antonio Brown was such a locker room distraction that Pittsburgh had no choice but to get rid of him. And Antonio Brown was having a lot of issues with Pittsburgh in the past. Okay? It's just that a lot of those stories haven't came out to the public because the Steelers are so great of a franchise that they don't allow certain stories that or what happens in practice to get to the media. But Antonio Brown got to the way that he was because of Mike Tomlin allowing it. And you look at Juju Smith-Schuster with what Juju Smith-Schuster has done, dancing on opposing teams' logos, all these TikToks and things like that. Juju Smith-Schuster is being allowed to do the exact same thing that Antonio Brown was allowed to do. And there's nothing wrong with allowing players to be themselves, allowing players to be vocal. But when you do this, there is going to cause problems in the locker room because eventually when a player says something or does something that's out of line and you don't hold that player accountable with the way that you hold the rest of the team accountable, that's going to cause problems. Look at what happened with the Seattle Seahawks after they lost the Super Bowl to the New England Patriots. When they decided to throw the football on the goal line instead of running the football with Marshawn Lynch, and the play call ended up not working out, and it led to the New England Patriots winning the Super Bowl, you guys saw what happened after that. There were players like Richard Sherman who were calling out Russell Wilson, Pete Carroll, being extremely vocal about this situation. And eventually it came to the point that the Seattle Seahawks had to get rid of those guys. And you look at what happened with the Pittsburgh Steelers having to ultimately part ways with Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell. That's what happens when you allow players to voice their opinions and you allow players to be vocal and you don't have a strong structure. The Steelers are an organization that doesn't enforce a lot of structure like a team like New England does. And this is a problem. This is what's to ask yourself, what is the difference between New England and the Pittsburgh Steelers? Both have great coaches, but one is more structured and the other one is more loose. And when you don't have a great structure and you allow players a lot of freedom to express themselves and be themselves, you have a lot of problems. And those problems end up going into the locker room, and the problems that you have in the locker room end up affecting the performance of the team. So you ask yourself this, what is the difference between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the New England Patriots? The answer is structure. One is more structured than the other. Structure matters in life. You got to have structure. If we didn't have any laws or any rules, America would be destroyed. Now, I know a lot of you guys already consider America to be a dumpster fire, whatever, but at the end of the day, this country, regardless how you feel about it, good or bad, could be a lot worse if we didn't have any rules, any laws, or any regulations, and we just allowed people to do whatever they wanted to. Now, I'm not saying Mike Tomlin is just running just terrible franchise where players can do whatever they want to and things like that. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that the structure in Pittsburgh isn't as good as the structure that they have in New England. Tom Brady was treated the same way that everybody else on the team was. Chad Ochocinco, a.k.a. Chad Johnson, was telling a story about his brief stint with the New England Patriots. And he was saying how Bill Belichick was cussing out Tom Brady and treating Tom Brady just like the rest of the players. Tom Brady was treated just like a practice squad player was treated. There were no favorites. There was no favoritism. That's structure. That's holding players accountable. And you look at what Mike Tomlin has allowed certain players to do, like Antonio Brown and Ben Roethlisberger and Le'Veon Bell, allowing those players to become divas and not nipping situations in the bud. And it looks like Mike Tomlin could be making a similar mistake with Juju Smith-Schuster. You see Juju Smith-Schuster danced on other teams' logos. Juju Smith-Schuster is supposed to be a leader. You can say anything you want to say about Antonio Brown, but when the game started and the final whistle blowed, Antonio Brown was all business on the field. It was a strictly business approach when Antonio Brown was on the field. Yeah, he celebrated after touchdowns and things like that. But one thing that I always respect about Antonio Brown is that despite his locker room antics and things like that, the dude was a model of hard work and dedication. Antonio Brown was a 6th-round pick out of Central Michigan. Nobody expected Antonio Brown to become the superstar player that he was in his prime with Pittsburgh. Antonio Brown was a great example that young wide receivers like Juju Smith-Schuster and Martavis Bryant could look up to on how you should work hard in practice. Now, everybody knows that Antonio Brown was great when it came to being dedicated and being a hard worker, but the things that he did off the field was not a good example. And you look at Juju Smith-Schuster, what is the example that he's setting for the young wide receivers in the locker room, for guys like Chase Claypool and Deontay Johnson and James Washington? Juju Smith-Schuster is a veteran. He is the guy who young players look up to. So what Juju Smith-Schuster does, other players, other young wide receivers are going to think that's okay. And you have to have a certain level of, when the game starts, you got to say, hey, man, let's lock in, let's focus. The New England Patriots, you never see them doing any TikToks before games on other teams' logos. You want to know why? Because they have structure. Structure matters in not only life, but it matters in sports. The best teams that win on a year-to-year basis have structure. The Steelers, I'm not saying they don't have any structure, but they're not as well structured or don't have the same amount of structure that the New England Patriots have. Okay? That's why teams like the New England Patriots have had more success than the Pittsburgh Steelers this past decade. Now, I know a lot of you guys are going to disagree with me on that, but I think that's the truth. Structure matters in life. Steelers don't have that structure. They allow players to become divas. Instead of nipping things in the bud early, instead of Mike Tomlin nipping Antonio Brown's antics in the bud early, he allowed that to manifest. And look what happened. Look what happened to Big Ben. I know Big Ben's the quarterback and everything like that, but look what happens when you treat Big Ben differently than how you treat all your other players. Players notice that. That's why Mike Tomlin has underachieved with the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's not because he's not a great coach. It's just because he just hasn't implemented that same structure that the Patriots have implemented. And I'm not saying he has to be Bill Belichick. Everybody can be their own guy. Everybody wins differently. But you have to have some kind of structure at the end of the day to win and be a consistent Super Bowl contender. And the Steelers haven't had that structure. That's the problem with Mike Tomlin and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Not enough structure. Too much freedom. Too much allowing guys to start out getting away with certain things, not holding guys accountable to the same way you will hold a practice squad player accountable. Not treating players and giving players the same treatment that you give everybody else. That's what allows players like Antonio Brown to manifest into divas. Because you don't hold them accountable. You don't treat them the same way that you treat everybody else. That's the problem with Mike Tomlin and the Pittsburgh Steelers. There's not enough structure. Structure has to be there to succeed in life. And there has to be structure if you want to be a consistent organization.